Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Friday, August 15th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 602 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms. And today we have another installment of our New York Jets player previews. You know the drill. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday throughout training camp and the preseason, we take a look at two New York Jets. One on the offensive side of the football and the other on the defensive side of the football. Today, in our 12th installment of the Jets 2025 player previews, on this Friday edition, we're going to take a look at Stone Smartt, tight end, on the offensive side of the football, and on the defensive side of the football, we're going to take a look at defensive tackle Leonard Taylor a little bit later on in today's episode. As always, though, we begin with the offensive side of the football, and that means we begin with the free agent signing at the tight end position, Stone Smartt, entering year 4 at 26 years old. He will be 27 in October, so 4th season at the age of 26 and 27 years old. He is 6'4", 226 pounds. He was a undrafted free agent that signed on with the Chargers in 2022. That is where he has spent all 3 of his NFL seasons, now enters his 4th year and his first with the New York Jets. He signed on with the Chargers as a UDFA out of Old Dominion, and this year, after he was non-tenured as a restricted free agent by the Chargers, he signed a 1-year, $1.35 million deal with the Jets. And Stone Smartt, similar to many other acquisitions that the New York Jets made this offseason, was one of those low-risk, high-reward type of signings where it is a very cheap contract, but they're getting a player who has shown some flashes and it certainly has some upside. Andre Cisco falls in that line of that type of signing. Tyler Johnson on the offensive side of the football, we broke him down at the wide receiver position. He falls under that umbrella of a low-risk, high-reward signing. Stone Smartt has shown receiving upside, and when you look at this Jets team from a receiving perspective, there is going to be a lot of pieces that are going to be involved in putting together the receptions and the yards outside of Garrett Wilson. In a way, the wide receiver too, and even outside of Breece Hall and Mason Taylor to a certain extent, it's going to be kind of by a committee. Can Stone Smartt emerge? Can any of these other wide receivers emerge? That's the big question. A couple of those guys, like Stone Smartt, are your intriguing, low-risk, high-reward type of options who, with the right coaching, right situation, can potentially take off and play a role for this team here in 2025. Now, before I get into what Stone Smartt did last year and really what to expect out of him and his role in this offense, he's got a very interesting background, and I do want to talk a little bit about it. This was a guy that grew up in Sacramento, California. He originally committed to Northern Arizona, which is an FCS school, as a quarterback. However, he played 2 games with FCS Northern Arizona, and then he moved and transferred to a JUCO school, which was JUCO route, River City College in California. Now, he played very well at Riverside City College, played very well there as a quarterback, and then he moved to Old Dominion, transferred to Old Dominion, and struggled at the FBS level, and then he signed on or switched positions at Old Dominion to wide receiver, and that eventually led him into the Chargers and signing on as a UDFA, transferring him to a tight end, and that's where the receiving background and the receiving upside comes from. But just even eliminating the receiving stuff, he originally started as a quarterback and then moved receiver and is now a tight end. So I thought that was an interesting background. Couple different colleges, FCS school, JUCO school, then FBS at the Division I level. So definitely an interesting college path. And so far through 3 years, minimal opportunities, but has certainly made the most at times here of his opportunities, especially when you look at last season. So when you break down the numbers, we'll take a look at last year's numbers and in his career numbers, and I want to get into a couple more advanced metrics and break down what he brings to the table. Last year, just the simple stuff, 15 games, started 2 of them for the Chargers, 16 catches, 19 targets, 208 yards, 13 yards per reception, 11 first downs, no touchdowns, did not find the end zone. Career stats, 38 games played, 31 receptions, 45 targets, 380 yards, 12.3 yards per reception, 1 touchdown. That came during the 2023 season, his second in the NFL. And a common theme of today is going to be Stone Smart's ability to not only make the most of his opportunities and show some flashes, but also his sure hands, which has been able to help him make the most of his small opportunities so far in his 3 years in his NFL career and 38 total games played. He's only had 2 drops. So that is something that is a positive and something that moving forward, you look at as a tool in his toolbox that is a good thing to have. Sure hands, again, coming from that receiving background. Now, a lot of this was the limited opportunities, and I want to kind of break that down. While it was only 19 targets last year, he caught 16 of those. He had an 84.2% catch rate and a 75% contested catch rate last season. He also had 10.1. He averaged a 10.1 ADOT, which is average depth of target, which ranks 6th out of 58 qualified tight ends. And he also registered 3 deep catches last year, which is 20-plus air yards. And that ranked 7th among tight ends, despite playing a very minimal, limited number of snaps. And despite all of that, this was a guy that was able to go out there and stretch the field a bit. And I think that's something that you look going into this season with this Jets team as something to keep an eye on. Can they stretch the field a bit? Can they take some deep shots? Stone Smartt was a guy who not only did he, when the ball was thrown his way, he was able to haul it in, but the average depth of target was 6th out of the 58 qualified. And he also had 3 deep catches of 20 or more air yards. That was 7th among all tight ends last year. That's impressive stuff. And he was in good company. So showed that ability as well to stretch the field. And that, again, kind of goes back to a little bit of the receiving background and able to go up and get the contested ball, the 50-50 ball, and able to haul in those balls 10, 15, 20 yards downfield where you need those bigger chunk plays. He was there to make some of those plays last year. And really, I think what the Jets looked at Stone Smartt and said, let's take a chance on this guy, cheap 1-year contract, was a certain sample size last year. Week 14 through week 17, Stone Smartt, the majority of his production came in those 4 games. And a big piece of that was he was replacing Will Dissly at the time. He started in 2 games over that period. Will Dissly was out with an injury. Stone Smartt stepped in. And what I think the Jets saw last year at a Stone Smartt, a lot of it came in this short stretch of games. So week 14 through week 17 of last year, here was Stone Smart's numbers. 13 catches on 14 targets, 164 yards, 12.6 yards per reception. Very impressive numbers for a 4-week stretch for somebody stepping in as a starting tight end. And most of his production came in those 4 games. 92.8% catch rate over those 4 games. 83.1 of his receptions came in those 3 games. Only 3 receptions the rest of the year. 13 of those came in those 4 games, rather. 78.8% of his receiving yards last year came in those 4 weeks. Only 44 receiving yards in the other 11 games. So the point is, when the snaps went up, and over those 4 games, he played 30.5 snaps per game, and he logged about 3.3 receptions for 41 yards on average across those 4 weeks. Solid numbers. And more importantly, he was reliable. 13 catches, 14 targets, 92.8% catch rate, as I mentioned just a couple seconds ago. Another thing that you look at Stone Smartt last year, and you look forward into this season and why the Jets went out and potentially brought him in, was through those 4 games, 3 of them really stuck out. Week 14, 15, and 16. Week 14, he had 3 catches on 3 targets, 54 yards, 18 yards per reception against the Chiefs. Week 15 against the Buccaneers, he had 5 receptions for 6 targets, 50 yards, 10 yards per reception. And in week 16 against the Broncos, he had 3 receptions on 3 targets for 37 yards. That's 12.3 yards per reception. So over those 3 games, not counting week 17, but that 3-game stretch against the Chiefs, Buccaneers, and Broncos, all 3 of those teams, playoff teams, including the Chiefs and Broncos divisional matchups, he caught 11 receptions on 12 targets, average of 47 yards per game, which was 141 yards over those 3 games, and an average of 12.8 yards per reception. That stretch as well against the Chiefs, Bucks, and Broncos, you saw a lot of really good things out of Stone Smartt. And I've said this a couple times, and again, you guys know I don't talk much about training camp or preseason in these episodes because it's more talking about what they did last year and projecting what's to come here in 2025. But Stone Smart's had a nice training camp. He had a touchdown against Green Bay in the preseason game. And I think there's a real chance that Stone Smartt should be this team's tight end 2 behind Mason Taylor right now without any other outside roster moves. And that's because he just he's shown more receiving upside than Jeremy Ruckert. And as I mentioned earlier, the way this Jets wide receiver, the way this Jets pass catching distribution is going to play out, you expect Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Mason Taylor. If everything goes as planned, those are going to be your top 3. But after that, it's going to be a little bit by committee. I would guess Josh Reynolds is going to lead the way as your technically wide receiver 2, but your 4th most targeted pass catcher. But that's no guarantee. You're going to have Reynolds. Arian Smith's emerging. And then you throw a name like Stone Smartt in there. Can he emerge as a tight end 2 for this team that can kind of fall into that committee of guys that need to step up behind Garrett, behind Breece, and behind the expected big role that Mason Taylor is going to play in this offense? Because this is also a tight end room. Just forget the receivers for a second. This is a tight end room that needs somebody behind Mason Taylor. You can't just have one. You're going to need a tight end 2 that can step up and play a role as a receiver. And Stone Smartt is that guy. He is essentially your bigger slot. He's not your prototypical blocking tight end. That's not him. He's got receiving upside, and the Jets hope they can tap into that and get more out of him and potentially be this team's tight end 2. And in the mix, getting targets in this committee approach that the Jets sort of have, the way this roster is structured, behind some of the top guys that you would expect to play the biggest roles in this receiving offense. So that's Stone Smartt as he enters the 2025 season, year number 4, but his first with the New York Jets. Now we move on here to Leonard Taylor on the defensive side of the football. Entering year 2 at 23 years old, of course, was a undrafted free agent, signed on last year out of Miami. 6'3", 305 pounds, 23 years old. And Leonard Taylor is a really intriguing player preview to dive into and is one of the more interesting and intriguing. I'll say that word again. You'll probably hear me say that a couple times in this set of the video. Players in this defensive line room, because we talk a lot about this defensive line room specifically coming at the defensive tackle spot as to who's going to emerge, who's playing next to Quinnen Williams, who is going to be that starting defensive tackle, that defensive tackle number 2 next to Quinnen Williams, rounding out that defensive line that when it is fully healthy, you have your edge rushers and Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson, Quinnen, and whoever else is next to him in that interior, rounding out that starting 4. And you have a bunch of different names, lots of veterans, but Leonard Taylor is one of the young guys in this room. And last year, being signed on as a UDFA, had a good summer, had a very good preseason, earned a spot on that roster on the 53, and played a role for this team last year. Played a nice rotational role for this team last year. And now you enter this season, and you kind of hope that he could take another step and potentially play maybe next to Quinnen Williams, or if not, which I think more likely than not, he probably won't be, and it's for a certain reason, which I'll get to here in a second, but can be a productive rotational pass rusher for this New York Jets defense here in 2025. When you look at last year, Leonard Taylor's rookie season, 14 games played, he played 261 total snaps, which was 22.7% of the team's snaps. That was 4th among defensive tackles on the team. So a clear depth piece, which shouldn't come as much of a surprise because he was an undrafted free agent in year number 1. Out of those 261 snaps, 147 came against the run, 114 came pass rushing. 24 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 9 pressures, 4 quarterback hits, 4 tackle for loss. He was also able to get his hand on 1 football and cause a pass deflection last year. So those are some of the basic 2024 numbers. But some of the other numbers, when you dive a little bit deeper, are a little bit more impressing, a little bit more promising, especially when you look at where he ranked not only among the league, but also among rookies in the role that he played for this team. This was a guy that flashed a bit last year. And there's still some areas that he needs to improve in. And as I said, we'll get to that here in a second. And that could ultimately be the difference between him starting and not starting next to Quinnen. But here are just some of how he graded out last season. 62.7 overall grade, 69.9 pass rush grade, and a 56.9 run defense grade. All 3 of these ranked really, really well among rookie defensive tackles last year. He was 5th among rookie defensive tackles in his overall grade. His pass rush grade was 1st among all defensive tackles, or rookie defensive tackles rather, in the NFL. And he was 8th among defensive tackles, rookie defensive tackles, in run defense grade. So he was top 10 in all of those categories, including 5th in overall grade and the best pass rushing grade out of rookie defensive tackles in the 2024 season. In the 14 games Leonard Taylor played, he graded out amongst the best in year number 1 at his position. Now, some other numbers that also, I think, show that Leonard Taylor in the role that he played last year was above average and pretty significantly above average and played that rotational role really well. And it gives you confidence here going into year number 2, because it's funny. Leonard Taylor is not your prototypical UDFA, or I guess maybe I shouldn't say that. He ended up being a UDFA, but this was a guy that just a year or 2 ago in Miami, many projected as a first-round pick. Many projected early on in the draft process as somebody that could go day 1 or even early day 2. And he fell all the way as an undrafted free agent. So from a Jets perspective, you hope that you kind of have a hidden gem here. No, I'm not saying Leonard Taylor is going to turn into a first-round pick level of play, but his production in the future here could be a lot better and over-exceed what you would expect to get from a UDFA just from his background and some of the things that he did out of Miami, and hear what he hopefully can do in the NFL. But moving on here more with some of these numbers. So I want to give you some numbers and where he ranked last year among rookies in 3 more categories. And then I also want to get into some other numbers as well. So his 7.9% pressure rate was 4th among rookies. His 1.75% sack rate was third among rookies, and his 6.5% run stop rate was 12th among rookies. So he was top 15, top 12, essentially, in those 6 categories among rookie defensive tackles. So top 10. For a UDFA, that's good. That's a good spot to be in. Now, some other numbers and where he ranks among 125 defensive tackles last year with 250 total snaps. So qualified defensive tackles in these rankings. Here is where Leonard Taylor fell in year number 1. 7.9% pressure rate was 42nd. His 1.75% sack rate, 18th. 6.5% run stop rate was 55th. His 3.8% defensive stop rate was 36th. His overall grade, pass rush grade, and run defense grade, which I labeled those earlier, 47th, 28th, and 52nd, respectively. So you break that down, you average it out. Out of those 125 defensive tackles that played 250 total snaps, when you average out where Leonard Taylor stood, he was about, on average, the 37th rated defensive tackle among the qualified ones in the NFL last year. So he was above average in year number 1. Well above average, in fact. He was better in this grouping than 88 qualified defensive tackles, which is 70.4%. He was better than. He was 37th. For a UDFA that played 22.7% of the team's snaps, which was 4th among defensive tackles. So again, a clear rotational piece in year number 1. It's a good spot to be in. He was inside the top 40. Now, the big thing with Leonard Taylor and the next step in Leonard Taylor's game has got to be the improvement in the run game. And you look at the numbers and the run stop rate and the run defense grade, while it graded out well among rookies and it was okay among the NFL qualified defensive tackles, right, 125, that is an area that it does need to improve in. And I do think it shows. I mean, his run defense grade and run stop rate was the lowest of his rankings among rookies. And his run stop rate and run defense grade was also the lowest among his rankings in the whole defensive tackle grouping. You know, out of 125, he was 55th and 52nd in his run defense grade and his run stop rate. So he was in the 50s, a little bit more average to below average in that area. And that's the next big step to Leonard Taylor's game. The biggest strength to him last year was the pass rushing and some of the flashes that he showed. Like I said, going back to last preseason, he was excelled. And that's ultimately what landed him a spot on the 53. He had a 77.5 pass rush grade, 7 pressures, 2.5 sacks, a 17.8% pass rush win rate, and 3 run stops in the preseason. More importantly, though, those pressures, the sacks, he popped off from a pass rushing perspective. Heck, we saw it in Green Bay on Saturday night. A sack and a forced fumble, which, of course, Jay Tufele picked up for a touchdown. The pass rushing ability is there. And you feel can only get better. The next step for Leonard Taylor is be better against the run. And that's the big thing for Leonard Taylor. If he wants to become a potential starter next to Quinnen, whether that's this year or down the road, the run defense needs to improve. As much as the pass rush is a strength, if the run defense starts to come along, that's where you really can start to see him develop. And I've always said to look out for Leonard Taylor because I think that the way the Jets approached the defensive tackle this year, they didn't draft a defensive tackle in a class that was loaded with them. And a lot of their signings were veterans on cheap contracts. I think Byron Cowher will be this team's starting defensive tackle week 1. But I do think, and I said this a couple of times throughout the offseason, that the way they approached the defensive tackle position this offseason, with not spending a ton there, that it feels like maybe this coaching staff, this regime, looks at Leonard Taylor as a piece for the future that they feel if they develop him well enough, he can eventually be starting next to Quinnen Williams. But the run defense needs to get better. And right now, the next big thing with Leonard Taylor is, And where it kind of schematically doesn't quite fit a little bit when you look at the potential pairing next to Quinnen is he's more of a 3-tech than a 1-tech, right? Cowart, Tufele, those guys, Derek Nadi, who's kind of on the roster bubble potentially now, even though he was signed this offseason as well. Those are more of your runs, your 1-techs, which fit next better than Quinnen Williams because those are more of your run-stopping type of guys. Leonard Taylor is more of your rotational defensive tackle that can rush the passer as a 3-tech more than a 1-tech. So that is where you do question the possibility of him being next to Quinnen. But if the run defense gets better and the pass rushing continues to excel or get better as well, but that's his strength. If he turns these flashes into consistent play or continued consistent play, that's where you potentially look at him as a pairing next to Quinnen. Maybe this year or sometime in the future. But Leonard Taylor is an intriguing player and a player that not many people talk about. And I think should get more attention because he did play well last year. And he could very well get an opportunity this year. And I think he very well could deserve an opportunity this year. The Jets may have their guy next to Quinnen, hiding in plain sight in Leonard Taylor. Some things to improve on, but there's a lot of good there that you look forward to with Leonard Taylor. So let me know what you think in the comments section down below. What are your thoughts on Stone Smartt entering the 2025 season and your thoughts on Leonard Taylor, potential starter? What are your thoughts there? Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Any other Jets takes you've got, let me know down below. Next player preview will be up on Monday morning, so stay tuned for that. Of course, before then, we'll have a ton more content coming your way. So appreciate you all so much. Until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.